Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's episode of Game Masters in the Machine. I am your host for tonight's festivities. My name is Matt Yancik, and I'm the founder and head game master here at Manufactured Myth and Legerdemain. And with this program, I hope to bring on a new game master or dungeon master every few weeks, or in this case, every month. It's been 4 weeks since the last episode. I'm sorry, I haven't been on the ball. And work on designing our games. So I really very much believe that game mastering is an art, it's a craft, and sometimes even a science. And I'm a firm believer, as some people that have probably watched my actual plays, I'm a firm believer in narrative. I am an English teacher at heart. I consider myself to be a storyteller, and I like to help others learn about storytelling. And I sort of believe that all of us at heart are learners. Yes, me too. Even teachers are learners. So in last week's episode of GMs in the Machine, I sat down with Steve Kanaras, and the two of us were kind of creating an unusual mashup. We were going to take hard-boiled noir, so as in like Maltese Falcon, James Ellroy, L.A. Confidential kind of noir, and we were going to try and make it fit with, well, believe it or not, sword and sorcery. Um, we may have bitten off more than we can chew. And indeed, last week we did. I sort of set up some rules and I said, okay, we're going to work for 2 hours, and that's the rule. We're basically going to complete the whole adventure in 2 hours. We're going to create the the city or the town. We are going to create the villain. We're going to create several scenes for each one of the acts, and we're going to create like a cool climax or final act for the adventure. Like most things I do, however, it didn't quite go as planned, and we went over our 2 hour time limit. We got pretty tired, and at a certain point, I just figured, when you're not feeling it, or when you're getting tired, or when you feel like you're spinning your wheels, it's really best to just set it aside and then come back later when you're feeling more up to sort of working on it. And so we did call it quits, but the one parter is has turned into a two-parter. So for tonight, what we're actually going to do is we're going to take a look at the narrative itself. Okay, so what we essentially did last week was kind of set up a lot of the things that we would end up using to build and create our world and our setting. We looked at genre and subgenre. We looked at setting and culture. We tried to come up with an antagonist. We tried to come up with a setup for the adventure and a pitch, and the pitch sort of leads us into the pitch is kind of like a way of encapsulating the entire adventure in just a few sentences. And then we, last but not least, we tried to come up with a hook and 3 acts through which to put our players. Now, we got through most of those. However, we didn't really get too deeply into the hook and too deeply into the 3 acts. We were, as I mentioned, kind of running out of steam. So tonight we think we're probably going to spend an hour or two just working on the narrative and the hook. So, like all things that I do when I teach in the classroom, tonight we are learning just as much as you. If there is something you would like to contribute to the stream, if there's anything you'd like to say, please feel free to speak up in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. But if we don't, we're pretty certain we're going to come up with some cool ideas. So, at any rate, with this in mind, let us make haste and let's get to my good buddy Steve Canaris, who is here with us tonight. Steve, I've just thrown you up onto the screen. How's it going over there?
Great, Matt. Thanks for having me back on. This is great. I'm excited to complete our adventure here.
Well, hopefully we can complete it, right? Because I sort of
Yeah,
feel like, again, I don't know about you, but I'm not gonna like impose any firm rules this time. I'm just gonna say we're gonna talk about the narrative and maybe the hook and maybe some pitfalls and the problems that can face the game master when they write out their adventures. Um, and so, with that, Steve, would you like, and if you don't want to, that's totally fine, but I figured that just to catch up some of those people out there that are watching that didn't see uh, our last episode, do you want to catch us up a little bit and tell us kind of where we are with our story and with our setup?
Sure. So, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, we decided to mash up genres,
Mm-hmm.
and we settled on noir and sword and sorcery, which, at first you may think maybe not so much alike, but then
Yeah,
as you delve in, there are some stuff. You're talking about smoky taverns, you're talking about seedy characters, and that fits in both. So it's not as far fetched of a mashup as you might
I agree.
at first think.
Yeah.
So where we went with it is we started with a city and
Yeah.
almost a city state, and we were kind
Yes.
of using history as a guide, like ancient Babylonian idea of this walled city state, which was like a hub of culture
Yeah.
surrounded by I don't want to say Paleolithic or even Neolithic villages, but not as civilized countryside. And so this city, which I don't think we gave it a name,
We
but we
didn't, and I think we
yeah,
should and it's up to you. But I sort
yeah,
of feel like maybe we can start filling in a little bit of the holes here. But it's not I don't think it's a requirement. But at any rate,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, and we kind of gave it a background. We gave it a almost a theocratic bent where there was a we called it the cult of owls, which
Mm-hmm.
kind of runs the place.
Yeah.
And there were, I don't know, did we call them aviaries, or we called it with the like towers of uh, scattered throughout the city, which were kind of like little worship centers.
Yeah.
Uh,
Was it Andy that mentioned that? I can't remember. There was somebody in the chat, and now I'm so sorry if it wasn't you, Andy, or if it was, but I think it was one of our viewers actually gave that um, to us that idea. But at any rate.
yeah, and so there's this city, there's these towers. There's a police force that's called the Eyes of Wisdom, which I think came from the viewers as well. That name
Mm-hmm.
came from the viewers. But it's centered on an owl god, like the patron, and in these old city states, going back to the Sumerian and later, they each had like a patron god, and so we decided that this patron god was an owl deity.
Yeah.
Uh, and so um, delving a little further, there's some police force, there's a solid guild structure,
Mm-hmm.
and then also we kept it almost democratic in the sense that wards had representatives, and there was no king per se, but the high priest kind of runs the show in a lot of ways. And we came up with the antagonist, who happens to be this high priest named Tito, Tyto,
Mm-hmm.
and he's kind of the big bad, I guess you'd say, in the story.
Yeah, and one of the things I kind of want to add here, just for those people that have recently tuned in or maybe didn't see the first episode, one of the things that we used in order to build our city quickly um, was a concept known as the seven aspects of culture. And like most teachers, I often bring my teaching into my game mastering. And one of the things that you kind of learn when you're studying history and social studies is that every society has seven aspects to it, and that would be their social organization, the way families or the city is, or their culture is kind of stacked on top of it, the different layers to it. The government, their form of government and the way they govern themselves, their religions, the customs and traditions that are kind of, in a way, kind of attached to that or often attached to it. Their economic systems, which are often very much influenced by those things I just mentioned, and then the arts and literature of their culture, as well as the language, which oftentimes grow out of that. And so, what Steve is actually mentioning here right now and talking about are the basically the pillars of the society that he and I were talking about. And so if you notice, we kind of went from top to bottom, and we just sort of went through and bounced around a little bit and started to fill in some of the details. Now, the reason why we do this is, in a way, we're creating a little bit of a sandbox here. We're creating shortcuts for ourselves. So let's say that our player decides to go to the bank, and we have some idea of what the economic systems of the setting are like. So we're not creating this out of whole cloth on the fly. We at least have a rough idea that, say, there are guilds, and then there's like a hall where the guilds all meet or whatever. And if you look here in our notes, you can see that there's a rival. They are rivals to the council, which I believe is the governing the governance, the form of government that we're using. So we can kind of make up on the fly these ideas with even the sketchiest and most basic of details. And these 7 aspects cover just about every corner, nook and cranny of any society. And if you go around the world, and I would guess if you go around the universe, you would probably, well, okay, let me withdraw that. But if we go around the world, I'm sure that most of these 7 aspects are covered. I'm sorry, Steve, I interrupted you.
Oh no, that was a great seg. Because I was just spitting out what we did, but you just kind of put it into a good framework. And
Mm,
I think what's important about that is that, now like you said, you look, we're creating, like behind me here, we're creating a blueprint, but your players are going to dictate a lot of what
mm,
happens. And so, like you mentioned, I don't even think we talked about banks when we were talking about that culture stuff, but your players may need to do that. And
right.
so the more you're prepared with the basics, who the police are, what the government looks like, what the arts and entertainment, what languages are spoken,
Hmm.
like if those things are at least thought about, they don't have to be fleshed out. You're not, especially for a one shot, you're not
Mm,
necessarily world building in the classic sense. You don't need a 1,000-page Bible to,
right.
to flesh out the whole thing. But the likelihood, like, you've got to create a tavern, you probably have to create a jail system, like,
Yeah.
because your players are going to end up in jail. They are, especially if you're dealing in noir.
Especially if they are mine.
Right. But if you're dealing in a noir genre, you got to have that. If you're dealing in a high fantasy one, you probably need it to know that there's a wizard council. But, these are the things that are going to come up,
I think
and so.
one thing I really like about doing this as well, and basing the cultures around the 7 aspects is, for me, it also gives me an idea of relationships. So what
Mhm.
happens to me is, let's say my players say, okay, I want to go to a bank. And I was like, banks? What? I never thought about banks. But if I have an idea of what the economic systems are like, and I know something about the relationship that that system has with the other aspects, I can say, okay, well, I've already sort of sketched out that they are rivals to the government, the council. And so I'm thinking kind of in my head, well, maybe I can take that character that I designed to be an ally to the players, and I was creating them because I thought they were going to go somewhere else. I'll take that NPC and I'm going to plug it into, maybe they are a loan shark somewhere that works outside of the system, and they are disgruntled because there's some sort of problem where the government, the council, maybe overly taxes the banks, or overly taxes the guilds or the merchants or something like that. And so I can kind of tear all of those things just out of what the sketch that I've created, and I sort of have an image in my head now of an NPC that might be some shady type in a back alley that is not really very happy with the way that things are being run, and maybe he works outside the system, and he's a kind of Robin Hood loan shark. Maybe he's a good guy, but he's just working against the council. So anyway.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, because when we did do this last a month ago, whenever it was,
I think it's about three
we
years ago, wasn't it?
3 years ago,
Yeah, I think so.
we did actively assign NPCs to some of these
Hmm.
aspects, and so rudimentarily you have I think we even named some of them, but you've got people that kind of fit those roles,
Yeah.
and I think one thing that you and I
Yes.
both talked about earlier today when we were prepping is you can plug and play some of this stuff. Like, there's important when you're dealing with an adventure, in this case, for example, we have a magic object, right?
Yep.
And you want to eventually deliver some information to the players about what this object means to the story, but that information can come from different sources, and you
Hmm.
got to be full, because like you just mentioned, sometimes your players will do things that you didn't expect, and you don't want to be caught with, well, they roughhoused and killed this NPC before he got to
Right.
deliver this information, but the NPC wasn't the necessarily the important part. Them getting the information is the important part.
Yeah.
And so knowing what bits need to fit in, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this in the act structure, because you got to move from one act to the next, which requires knowledge and action to get from point A to point B. If you've got enough NPCs and you've got enough thought into what that bit of information is and how it gets delivered, then you don't get stuck in a
Right.
plot point,
I you
and,
Oh, go ahead.
and no, please.
I was simply going to name drop, if I might. Would you,
Sure.
if I may? So
Yeah.
I was going to say, in the very first interview I ever did on Role Player with 1,000 Faces, which is available if you take a look down in the bottom, and you can just go click on it and subscribe and all that stuff. I talked to Sean K. Reynolds of Monty Cook Games, and one of the cool bits of advice that he told me was basically you should be sort of prepared as a game master to, I think it's generally termed reskin, but his point was to take the information from something else that you had been planning. Like maybe you're planning everyone to go to the arts district, and but your players for whatever reason don't end up going to the arts district, and you think to yourself, all of that information, all of that the NPCs and the atmosphere that I designed for it is just gone. Well, instead of saying it's all gone, he was saying you can just sort of tear it out from there and then replant it in whatever new scene your players have created. So if they decide to go, instead of to the arts district, they decide to perhaps go to I don't know, the downtown business district, you can tweak a lot of that stuff that you have, reskin it, as in create a new sort of character based on the skeleton of the old character, and then just plop it down in the business district. And a little map, kind of like what you see. Well, I never know which way to point. Kind of like you see here on the screen, can help you do that because you have an overhead view of what's going on around you. Um, so let's sort of scroll along, and to let those of you at home watching know what we're doing, Steve and I are actually using Google Docs to share and create our story in a template, which I hope and plan to make available to people, like in a link below, like a blank version of it. Um, you had mentioned earlier that our protagonist for our Maltese Falcon meets Robert E. Howard sort of adventure here is Tito. Can you tell us what we know about Tito, or what you know about Tito?
Sure. And it just, I think you misspoke. Our
Oh,
antagonist, not our protagonist.
that's right.
Yeah. Sure. So Tito he's the Inquisitor. He is the archpriest of the cult of the Owl God. And to the population at large, he is he's the spiritual leader of the group. Now, um, they're not necessarily malevolent
Mm-hmm.
in the way that they interact with the people. They're the cult, they're the worship. They have a little bit of taxing authority, but they're not horrible. Uh, Tito, on the other hand, is, and this is kind of the crux of the adventure, is that Tito has visions, and he has contact with the owl god, and his grand design, which is what makes him the antagonist here in the adventure, is he's planning to bring the god to life, or to this plane,
Mm-hmm.
and he will be ruling on the right hand of this owl god, and this owl god is horrible. He plans on massacring people, blood sacrifice, and basically destroying the city in a really, really awful way.
Mm.
Now, the rank and file don't know about this plot, but he certainly does. And so so he's almost a detached person in the story, because it's not like he's going to be appearing in act one to the characters, but he's the influence that is running the show, and that is bringing it in. And I guess we could talk about the hook that we talked about last time. um there's it's very small scale, and this very much fits into the noir genre, where there's like an overarching stuff happening that the
Mm.
that the players don't really know about,
Something
and they
dark in the
kind of,
underbelly.
yeah, dark in the underbelly, and they get clues of it, but their story is very street level. And we established that the players are going to be, they're going to be from the outside, the outskirts. They're the young, the innocent that just kind of come to the city to, you know live some high life, maybe make some money. And so they get roped into a job by one of the guild masters, to steal, to hijack, basically train robbery of a caravan that's coming into the city. Now, so that's all they know in the beginning.
Mm.
So they don't know anything about Tito, and they don't know anything, and they get kind of roped into this plot, because they steal an item that's central to a ritual that's coming, either in a week or a couple of days, whatever the timeline happens to be. That is this object of power, is crucial to the ritual,
Mm-hmm.
and the ritual is the one that Tito wants to establish his power with. So that's where, the street level meets the high level, and
Right.
what the players do with this object, how they approach it, who tries to come get it from them, is crucial, because now the highest level sees them as the threat, which they are once
Right.
they possess this object.
And so, looking at what I've popped up on the screen, so Steve, just so you know, and maybe you viewers at home know, Steve's not actually looking at a screen cap. He's looking at his own document at this point. But I'm on number 3, the antagonist, and we have some details here about Tito. And what Steve has just sort of explained is what he has basically created based on what you see here, some of what these questions cover. So, for example, just very simply, who is the antagonist? What is their history, and what drives them? And so Steve has just sort of explained a lot of that. What does the antagonist seek? How does it fulfill them? And this is kind of like an interesting one that I think adds a lot of depth and texture, unless you want to do something very simple. But are there conflicts between the antagonist and the antagonist's minions, or perhaps other people? And so one of the things that we had sort of decided on was that the captain has the captain. I can't remember the captain's name, but they have influence with the eyes of wisdom, and perhaps that's stronger than actually Tito's. We're worried that it's stronger than Tito was worried that it may like cause some sort of conflict within his own group. Is that correct? Do I kind of understand that, or
Correct. And the captain's name is Mattis.
that's right?
And yeah, so he's kind of we established him as kind of the grizzled veteran type,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and his presence and history inspires a lot of loyalty among his men,
Mm-hmm.
and Tito's a little afraid that he might be a loose cannon, so he keeps him in the dark about a lot of obviously his plotting, but also about just general functioning. And
Mm-hmm.
Mattis tends to ask a lot of questions that maybe he shouldn't ask, and that makes him butt heads with the powers that be.
Right. And so if I don't know, do you feel kind of comfortable with that? Can we pop along to kind of talking about the setup and the pitch now at this point, just to sort of bring people up to speed? Um, so the next thing that now that we kind of have our basically we have the basics of our town, and of course as we plot our story here, we are going to be working toward fleshing it out a little bit. And we also have our antagonist. But now what we kind of want to talk about here is a little bit of the setup and the basic plot. So Steve has just kind of like set up the most basic elements of who our bad guy is. But the basic plot is maybe where the bad guy and the bad guy's plans meet our player characters. And of course, in a game in which we are playing an ongoing campaign, we probably have a really good idea of who our play characters are and maybe what their motivations are. But the unique sort of thing about either a one shot or maybe the first couple games of any ongoing campaign are that the characters are still being explored, and so our players, even I don't know about you, but I played characters for months before I really sort of nail them, and I feel like I get like their tone and who they are correctly. But um, can you tell us a little bit about Steve, what you would say our basic plot is going to be in all of this?
So the basic plot is the outsiders
Mm-hmm.
have come into the city to seek their fame and fortune, um, and like I said before, they're hired to um, to steal something, which they don't really know what it is. They just,
Mm-hmm.
the guild master says there's a box in this caravan, and you steal it, bring it to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the main, I guess you call it the plot hook, or
Mm-hmm.
that's the center of the action. That's meeting in the tavern, getting the job right,
Mm-hmm.
and from there, that's where I think that the adventure can go in a couple of different directions based on player choices, which I think is important. Now we've set up this heist, for lack of a better term,
Mm-hmm.
and we've set up that there is a you know uh, celestial plot afoot that they know nothing about. Which, as the adventure progresses, obviously you drop clues to clue them in that something's happening, and then you throw them into the scenario, right? So uh, I think we talked last time that the heist is going to go easier than anybody could possibly imagine.
Right. That's kind of the catch, right?
Right. And so, they could spend hours preparing and shopping for it and doing whatever, and then they get there and it's a breeze,
Mm.
which should probably give them a clue that something's not right, or maybe not.
Mm.
Maybe they just think that they're great, but at any rate, they get
The
this object,
perfect,
and they
the
bring it back.
perfect first level characters. Absolutely no problems, nothing to worry about. It couldn't be a setup or bait
Yeah.
at all.
And so then there's a meetup point,
Mm-hmm.
and when they get there, and this is where I think we kind of both arrived at the same kind of idea at the same time.
Yeah.
The the person that was supposed to collect the item under a bridge, I think we had said,
Something, yeah, I don't remember exactly, but yeah, something like that.
uh, and he's dead. He's been murdered. And so here it is, standard noir uh, storyline. they're carrying stolen goods,
Mm.
and they're at the scene of a crime.
And wasn't there the added complication? So now, as I'm looking at the hook, I can kind of see some of the things that were causing trouble, right? So, wasn't the idea that they did end up stealing it? It was going to be super easy, and then once they go to the rendezvous point to meet the person they were going to pass it to, they are dead. But the other thing that happens is that the city, if I'm correct, is locked down.
That's correct. And that comes about, which they won't know at the time until they do some scouting. That comes about because the object they stole is vital to the ritual that Tito is planning. And so he gives the order that nobody leaves, and we track down who did this. So basically making our characters, our players, fugitives from the the Inquisitor, and also the fact that they get there, and this kind of high and mighty guild leader is now dead at their feet,
Hmm.
kind of makes them a fugitive from the law as well as the Inquisitors.
Right, right.
So
Okay,
so here we are thrown into classic noir plot. I don't know what I've done. I didn't do anything, but everybody's out to get me.
right, right. Okay, so then with that, I believe that oh, and just to sort of show one little thing here, I had mentioned earlier that we don't really, if we were plotting, say, for a game where we know our characters, we would end up actually adding specific things to the plot in order to connect our characters to it, to interest them, and to involve them. We are planning this as kind of like a one shot or maybe even a two shot at this point adventure. And so, in that respect, we're kind of like expecting the players to bring their own sort of seasoning to the game. So we may not per se have things that are going to attract them. We may go with some tropes or some cliches, or it may just go with a simple handshake agreement that, okay, we're going to take the bait at the very beginning, and then we're going to let the plot unfurl and the GM do their thing. So this specific area following the hook is just about making things more specifically hooky to the players. But now, um, we're going to get into, as long as you're comfortable with it, Steve, and you're ready to sort of go, we're going to get actually into the narrative itself. Um, so Steve has kind of laid the groundwork and given you a very overall overarching view of what the story is going to be about. But as sort of a preamble to what we're about to do as far as designing the narrative goes, um, I want to explain to you a little bit about my my Lord and Savior, Joseph Campbell, and the the hero's journey. Now, Joseph Campbell is not specifically responsible for the three-act structure. Of course, Joseph Campbell came up with the hero's journey, but the hero's journey is a rather long and arduous journey that is probably better for a written linear kind of format. It doesn't work so well, at least in my experience, with a one-shot adventure. So I tend to go with a three-act structure. And the three-act structure is the most basic structure, storytelling structure of all. So the three-act structure is actually just a simple setup, confrontation, and a resolution. And what you're looking at right now is basically the three acts as we see them in films and television. So traditionally, there will be some sort of introduction where we get to know the characters. There is an inciting incident, say the robbery that we're talking about, or the hook in a saloon where the players are asked to do their thing. And then we pass through, following this hook, we pass through what are known as a threshold. And the threshold is kind of like the next step in the journey, getting to the actual getting to the plot and advancing the plot along. And we go through a series of typically 3 challenges, each one getting progressively more difficult than the last. Each one is a confrontation with a bad guy or with a problem. And the heroes push through until they sort of reach a point of no return where they cannot go back and they are forced to ride the roller coaster through the second threshold into the resolution. And the resolution would be it's typically it's the in film and television, modern film and television, it's typically a confrontation with the big bad guy. Um, and then at that point, naturally, the big bad guy is usually defeated, though not always. And so once this happens, there is what is known as the denouement, and the denouement is the last 5 minutes of a film where the heroes sit around and talk about what they've done, and they feel as if they have reached a new level of heroism. So they may have entered as babes in the woods, but now they are actually far more seasoned and experienced. These are the 3 acts that you typically see in a linear, straight story where there is a writer behind the scenes that is manipulating things. Now, um, the difficult thing about a role playing game is, of course, that we don't want to railroad our players. And if we just present them with one confrontation after another, and we don't give them any true choice, then it gets kind of boring for them because they want a challenge. They want to be able to move around within the setting and move around within the plot, discover different characters or non player characters, discover different places, come up with their own clues. And so what I typically use is a different sort of act structure. Now it's still 3 acts, but I use more of a sandboxy act structure. So if you notice here, you'll see that there is an Act 1, there is an Act 2, and there is an Act 3. But we're looking at them from a top-down viewpoint. This is much more of a sandbox viewpoint. So the idea is that the characters enter with the intro and there is some sort of inciting incident. This inciting incident draws them into the story, and then at that point, they have the choice of going with one scene or another scene. They have a choice of going to one place or another place. And there may be a series of tasks involved in the setup in Act 1, which the characters have to satisfy in order to open the door, proceed through Threshold 1, and then start Act 2, the confrontations. And now notice again, there are 3 confrontations, 3 scenes, and typically we don't really know always what order the scenes are going to be done in because the characters may choose to go to the library and meet the bad guy that you had been saving for the very end. So we don't always know what order they're going to be in, but as game masters, what we try to do is create an order in which the players gradually get the difficulty increased on them. So let's say we were planning the library as the last confrontation, um, and they decide to go there first. Well, that means that we downgrade our very first scene and we make it easier, or we move, as Sean K. Reynolds was telling us, you move some of the things that you were designing to be in the arts district or the business district, and you place them in that first scene. And the players basically bump around in Act 2, and each confrontation increases in difficulty until they satisfy the requirements of Act 2, and they move along to through the threshold and to the resolution and hopefully what is the climax and the final confrontation with the bad guy. Now, all of this is to probably a lot of it's a lot of detail, which I want everyone at home to forget about. But I'm just sort of telling you what I think about and what we think about when we're designing our Act 1, our Act 2, and our Act 3. So, Steve, I'm so sorry.
It's all right.
I just went into a soliloquy. I bored a lot of people out there. But let's just start talking about our 3 acts and how we can beef them up and how we can kind of like make them more interesting. Um, would you like to sort of take it and sort of show us a little bit and talk to us a little bit about what we had thought about for Act One to set up our adventure?
Sure. So, Act One being the scene setting.
Hmm.
We talked a little bit about, bringing the characters into the city, uh, maybe through the gates, and you can make this as interesting or as simple as you want. They might get questioned, "Who are you? Why are you coming in?" Or they might just let them in. But this is where the characters can kind of get a grasp of what the city is. This is their first time in probably seeing this many people, so there should
Hmm.
be kind of an essence of discovery. They may want to shop, they may want to drink, they may want to, you know, uh, just what does the kid from the country do the first day he sets into Paris?
Right.
That type of idea, and then of course, um, they'll be approached. They're not obviously people of wealth, people of means, and they're green. So one of the incidences or encounters, if you will, in this will be, them being hired for this job. Now that could come before they go shopping, that could come after they go shopping, but at some point in this Act One, they need to get hired. And I think knowing that that is going to happen, I think you can bring it about in several different ways. And this is
Hmm.
where the player agency is involved, because you don't know what each of these players is going to want to do. So they might get hired when they're at the tavern in the classic sense. They might get hired when they're buying weapons. Why are they buying weapons? Hey, who would be buying weapons? Oh, you know what? Maybe the shopkeeper is the one that introduces it, but ultimately, you know, somebody is going to offer them the job.
So
Um,
let's talk about this for just a second. Let's say, and I'm just putting on my devil's advocate cap.
Mhm.
Um, you had mentioned that they kind of are getting a grasp of what the city is, and of course, in most typical adventures, we end up, at the tavern, um, getting hired and just being flat out, told, here's some money, or here's a certain thing. If you do this certain other thing for us, we will exchange these two things and we'll agree. Is there any way that we could maybe create a situation in which they are just hired not at a tavern, just to sort of turn the trope on its head and give us something new? Does anything come to mind for that?
well, sure. So let's twist it a little bit.
Okay.
They're at the market, and they're buying food,
Hmm.
or they're buying whatever, and one of them insults somebody, and then rather than being hired to do something, they're almost threatened to do something. It's like, you just besmirched my honor, and the only way that you're going to be able to get out of this is to do this for me.
Hmm.
So being hired to do a job doesn't necessarily mean look at the adventure board and pick out what you want.
Right.
You can kind of twist it in ways where they're going to do something, but not necessarily for the reason that you thought they would do something.
So,
And go ahead.
well, I was going to say, this is very much a kind of noir thing. Like, this reminds me of situations where people are. So, this reminds me of Escape from New York, reminds me of Neuromancer, where there's the toxin that's been put into the bodies of the main character, and they're forced to do something. They have 24 hours, 48 hours to do whatever. This to me kind of feels, it kind of feels like a ticking clock. It's something that you see in a lot of hard-boiled kind of adventures. Um, what would the possible insult be, just to sort of give us something? Any ideas?
This is where I think, the outsider in the big city, you don't know the cultural norms. It could be something as simple as they're haggling with a merchant,
Hmm.
and haggling could be a complete insult in this culture. Or it could be any number of things where it's very easy for an outsider to run afoul of cultural norms without even knowing it. you know
Hmm.
so go ahead.
How about so maybe yeah, and you know what, you're right, because typically that's actually what every time I sit down at a game, there's always someone that wants to haggle with the people at the market. And so maybe this could be something that we could kind of foreshadow a little bit when, or you could foreshadow a little bit, like when they're entering the city, they notice that these things just are exchanged or whatever, and maybe the prices are all set at something, and maybe within this culture, it's actually considered to be an insult to haggle because generally speaking, maybe the marketers, the merchants offer the genuine price, and it's like you said, an insult to undercut that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where I think you can add a lot of flavor, uh that's apart from, maybe it's not really apart from us in the real world. Like anytime, I've never been to Thailand,
Mm.
but if I didn't do any research before going to Thailand and just acted like your average American, I'm sure that there are things that you would do, and
Yeah,
and you've lived in Japan.
yeah,
You know it firsthand. There are ways you can act that will horrify them, or if not, that crazy, they'll think of you as a buffoon,
right.
because you're like, how dare you do that? So I think it's very easy for an outsider to trip up in a culture. So I think that that's just one other way of, um, putting your players in a situation where they think that they're acting kind of normal, but this is not.
So maybe the merchant is part of a network of like that's like related to our crime boss or something like that. And so when they offend the merchant, which seems like when they approach them to just be some mild-mannered everyday person, um, perhaps like a whole crew of thugs are sort of pulled in and drag them aside or drag them to an underground or something like that, and then just give them this, offer them a chance to make the wrong right.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So if that's going to happen, let's see then. At the market buying food, one of them insults someone rather than. There we go. And so they are forced by the merchants and thugs to rob caravan. So I'm going to just copy and paste this. So when they go shopping, though, what are some of the things that they're going to see when they're touring the city?
Well, I think that, one thing that's very important in Act One,
Hmm.
and I know that you do this in your games, and I try to do it in my games, is you drop a lot of hints, foreshadowing type hints about, and in this case for this adventure, what kind of hints would you be dropping? You're definitely going to be introducing the eyes of wisdom. They could just be, as simple as, that police force walking by dressed in armor that's got, owls on all over it. Other hints you're going to drop is, what is this cult of owls and how do they worship? What, they're going to see just by looking, these temples, these spires with the aviaries and the central one. So you're going to be dropping things that seem like just background flavor, but in the context of this game, eventually they're going to run into these people. Eventually they're the the owl culture is going to be important. We also, talked about language and this, kind of the communication, like this weird hooting kind of communication. So that hint, all of these things, I think, kind of get dropped in Act One with very little context, but and you know this, just from some of the players that we play with, they've got a notebook writing everything down because it's
Yeah,
it's 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 very important,
yeah,
especially when you're not, when you're role playing in a different world, that you're picking up these little cues, and I don't want to call them red herrings. They're not really red herrings,
Mm.
but they just don't make a lot of sense yet. But eventually they will.
So I think we could kind of tie a lot of this stuff together. Like I had forgotten actually about the owl hooting that we talked about. I really like that. Is it possible that the owl hooting could be some sort of is that a language? Are we saying that's a language of the cult of owls? Or is that a language that's used in everyday speak? Or is it something used by like the thugs that are about to pull our guys aside and then sort
I,
of force them into the situation?
I think I saw it as almost like a thieves' cant type of communication, you know, and not everyone will understand what each of the hoots mean, or maybe it could be, that the priests do it in a very ceremonial way, but then the thugs have adopted it, and if you do it in a certain pattern, it means something completely different.
Right.
And these things, if you do go with um the insult, and the thugs are putting them up to stealing the stuff, they may teach them, if it hoots 3 times in succession, then it means this, almost like a Morse code type thing.
Wait a minute. I have an idea. And maybe we can go back to this at a certain point. But what what if we create a situation? Here's the hook. We create a situation where the we create a situation in which the players see an owl flying through, and we give them a cutesy moment where they want to like play with it. Or there's always going to be a player that wants to go up to it, or they want to shoot it, or they want to like eat it, or they want to do something like that, right? And so that's the insult. They hoot
Yeah.
towards it, and they end up kind of like making a sound or making a noise that alerts someone else or offends someone else. Or I mean, they could. Sometimes what I do at the very beginning of a game is I can say, okay, well, you're carrying some food with you. What sort of food? Like the local game, you notice there's birds, there's like whatever, blah 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 blah. And then when the players walk in there, they've got the bird like and they've got an owl hanging from their belt, and
Right.
they plucked it. So could I add an option here, and say that the insult might be related to owls in some way?
Yeah. I think that works.
And then we leave it open enough so that, like, I mean, I'm kind of have an idea in my head of what I would do. I would like just have owls all over the place. They're like cattle in Delhi. They're just walking all through the place, and maybe the owls are just everywhere, and maybe our players aren't particularly fond of them, or they get in the way. So that could be something that we do. Um, okay. So if we have a scene 1A in which they're touring the city, and then they end up, and I kind of feel like these should maybe be reversed just from a order standpoint, but because the setup has to happen after they've toured the city. But having said that, they do have to um, go to the robbery.
Right.
And this is in some ways like the most pivotal thing because it's got to be easy. What do we think about the robbery? How would we set that up? How would you set that up? I'm sorry.
Well, I think insofar as this would be probably the most railroaded part of this, in terms of they're going to know, based on whoever is, hired them or coerced them to do it, that the shipments to the city come in at night, and so they need to figure out where they want to do the robbery. They'll be given, if the caravan has a train of, you know 12 wagons, they'll be told which wagon has the what they need, so and then it'll be up to them to figure out, hey, what's the best way to approach this? Is it using magic? Is it using, charm? Whatever they choose to do it. But as we mentioned before, it's all going to work, and it's going to work beautifully, and they're going to feel very confident that they did it. But basically, they'll be given, hey, this is when the train's coming to town, and this is what you have to do.
Um, so then let me ask you this. Because in a way, you've just said that it's the most railroaded part, but what's kind of interesting here is it is railroaded in the fact that you're going to let them win.
Hmm.
But it's not really real. I think this is a good opportunity for them to sort of reverse railroad and tell you how they want to do it, right?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
you're just gonna like so if I were GMing this scene and I know I'm gonna give it to the players, what I would probably do is I would look at like my 5 players and I'd say, okay, what's your favorite weapon? What's your favorite way of doing it? And I would sort of cultivate and pull out of them. Maybe one character loves to use axes, like double axes or something. Another character likes to like throw nets, and like another character maybe wants to I don't know dig dig a trench, which I'll let them do just for fun. I'll just say okay, you can do it, not a problem. Um, but I think this might be a good point to reverse railroad them and allow the players to railroad me, us, you as game master, and it's like total wish fulfillment in that respect. So, if do you think this sounds kind of okay?
No, I think that's exactly right, because even though the outcome, you know, you let them come up with it. Like you let them be the train robber, and it could be as simple as, just walking up to one of the caravans and asking for it, or it could be as difficult as, like you said, digging a trench and popping up out of it. But it gives them the ability to plan, and then let them say, "I love it when a plan comes together." But you
Hmm.
knew that it was going to come together, and that's okay, because you knew that they were going to steal this. There's no situation in which that's not going to happen.
Right. They're gonna win no matter what. Um,
Right.
but now let me kind of like throw a wrench here in the works, and I'm gonna ask you here about this. Um, we're sort of setting up the concepts, but what are the interesting things and details that they're going to encounter in this caravan? So I like the fact that you've already mentioned it's like a wagon train of 12 wagons. They're told which one the item is in, but what are some of the things that they're going to encounter when they reach this wagon train? Not to put any pressure on you at all. I'm just going to be
No,
quiet.
I would say that it would be a good time to establish that um, crime is very limited in this city. So the caravan, it doesn't seem to have armed escorts.
because
Um,
because they rule with an iron fist.
or just culturally, it could be tagging onto the cultural norms. Like there's a truce between, the guilds or the merchants or whoever, but that this thing doesn't happen in this place. What I like doing with things like that is kind of turning things on their head, because
Hmm.
obviously, there's a lot of fantasy tropes where, it's bandits on the road, and
Mm,
you have a guy with a crossbow sitting, driving the wagon train in case there's bandits.
yeah,
And then here you are, that's what your players are going to think they're going to need to be prepared for. And oh wow, that didn't happen.
right.
So I think it's good to turn tropes on their head a little bit,
Hmm.
and like the trope of, hey, going to the bar and pulling an adventure off the adventure board. We did it with coercion, or we did it with something different. And maybe the reason why that they were drawn into this coercion is because they're ignorant of the norms, and that the wagon train is not expecting an attack, because nobody that was not an outsider would dare do that.
Right, right. So then let me go back to or circle around to this again. What are some of the cool things that we're going to find in this wagon train?
You know, I I haven't given it a ton of thought, but I think that really playing on this theme of the city being this magnificent place, like they could find that these wagons are full of jewelry. They're full of like textiles that are beyond anything that they've ever seen in their villages. Like rather than regular cotton clothes, you've got silks, you've got all kinds of amazing things that none of them would have ever seen, but that in the city are fairly commonplace. So I think that kind of wonder, and there could be perfumes that they've never smelt before, and spices that they've never tasted before, and just all this kind of um, wealth and richness that in a city is, yeah, that's normal. This is civilization, but for these characters is like, this is wild. This
Let me
is
ask you this then. What would be
sure.
something, let's say that we're in a city and maybe we can get something even more unique to this city. If the owl is worshipped like this, is there anything in particular, some sort of commodity or some sort of, um, this is going to sound silly.
Hmm.
I don't know. Does everybody have pet birds? Or is there a massive amount of bird seed that comes in and out because they feed all the bird? I don't know. I know I'm just throwing stuff out there, but I don't know. Is there
No,
something
I
related to
like that.
owls or?
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
I mean, I like that idea of, like actual live birds coming through. And maybe some of these wagon trains are just wall to wall perches.
And I think
you
that
know
it should probably be something that would be like in a reverent way, right? So it's not like they're enslaving, like it sounds silly, but they're enslaving the birds. They're pampering and spoiling the birds, right? And other items to to take care of birds. And maybe it is that like the owl is at the top of this pecking order, and so people love birds. And I don't know, maybe even birds are legal to keep, but owls perhaps are not, or something like that. This might even relate again to what we were talking about hooking our players. Um, okay. Do we want to add anything to that? Do you wish to add anything to that, or?
No, I think that gives enough, and it also, I think as a GM, it gives you um, broad enough that maybe the players ask you what they want to find.
Right.
And the best way, it's kind of like the old improv game. It's yes and, like if they suggest something, unless it's completely outlandish, let it be there,
Right.
and let it work, and twist it. So
Right.
you know I think that's what's great about like markets and caravans and whatever is, it could be anything.
Yeah.
So let it be something.
Yeah.
you
Okay.
know
Um, then with this in mind, so we basically have the shopping moment. We have the setup or the inciting incident where they're drawn underground and they're sort of forced into this situation. Now, they need to meet someone to pass this item along. Uh, and I think you had said it was under a bridge. I
Mhm.
forget what we said, but um, how do you envision this location and like what's the time? Is it like at the stroke of is it like 4 a.m. after after they've done the robbery, or is it like at
Yeah, I
noon the
think
next
it's in
day,
the
or
middle of the night. I think they were given instructions that you're going to meet this person at this location at this time, and you drop it off, and then your debt will be paid, or you'll get your reward at that time. uh and then they bring the object, which, the more I think about it, maybe some kind of an idol would be appropriate. Certainly something like maybe carved out of some material or cast in some metal that they've never seen before. But certainly knowing that there's something powerful inherently with it. And if there are any, magical characters, which, just to back up a little bit in genre,
mm-hmm.
sword and sorcery usually the protagonist is not a magical person. Usually they're
That's right.
more thieves,
Low magic.
fighters. Yeah, very low magic, and magic is usually reserved for the bad. It's not like um, some of the D&D worlds where magic is every day, and it could be healing potions and whatever. Usually magic and sword and sorcery is dark. It's a lot of curses, it's a lot of,
Hmm.
it's not the kind of useful magic. It's more the terrible type stuff. It's making you know snakes come out of something,
Right.
or somebody being cursed, or it's much more dreadful. So I would imagine, especially if you're running this in like a tournament setting, or and I don't want to say you're dictating what the characters are, but you're limiting their choices to what they could be. um, then encountering something that they would see as magical, I think makes it brings them to other directions when it comes to the story plot, because they won't have the ability to identify it,
Right.
and they won't have the ability to know it on their own. So that will take them to investigate other NPCs, be it a black market fence, or be it somebody in a temple, or something, but that would know what to do with something like this.
Hmm. And so,
So
mm,
good.
well, I was going to say this kind of leaves us though with our question, however. So you had hinted at the item being some sort of statue or something like that. But what is our location then? Is it simply a bridge? Is there going to be something
Yeah,
unique?
I think a bridge. I think a bridge, like it could be, imagine a modern city where you have like an overpass type bridge, and underneath it there's maybe some people down on their luck that are sitting there with an open fire, and so it's certainly not the kind of location that you would think uh, would be where a wealthy guild boss would want to meet. And so that should give the PCs some clues that something a little seedy is going on here.
Okay. And so if that is true, I am assuming that this is going to be at the edge of town before things are thrown into lockdown. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. What do we think our item is, just to have something sort of to entice our players, or maybe catch, like, even if it doesn't necessarily have any sort of an obvious magical property, and it's just simply an item that's needed to complete this ceremony and complete this ritual. Um, how are we going to kind of interest the players in it? Because I, the instant I thought hard-boiled noir and sword and sorcery, I thought of a Maltese falcon.
I think that's great. I'm also thinking, and I know you've seen it because our generation always has, but the box in Pulp Fiction, where you
Oh,
you you open it and it glows, but you don't even know what's in it. But it could be like a Maltese falcon. It could be like a jewel encrusted bird, or something of that nature. But then when you open the box, there's like a feeling that washes over you, you know, and as more uncivilized people, that might terrify them a little bit, and they may want to be rid of it as soon as possible.
so a feeling of dread. It could be a jewel encrusted bird within a box that, when open, fills you with a feeling of dread, or something
Yeah,
else.
I would say dread. Maybe like a dull blue light emanates from it.
Ooh, from the eyes.
Yeah, and it's cold.
That'd be something. What if it were like just as cold as, like, a piece of ice or something, but it appears to be made out of just simple stone, or something.
Hmm.
Um, okay, that works. But yeah, and maybe it could even, it may be because what'll be nice and what I like about this is sometimes I like to just sort of describe this thing to the players, and then they sit back and they start talking about what it is. And then many times they kind of come up with the the best stuff, stuff I never thought about. And I'm just setting up a situation, and they start talking. Like, for those of you that maybe have watched our streams, I think Jared Riley, who plays with us a lot, he's really good at that. I'll often just sit there, and he kind of thinks he knows the plot a lot, and so I just sit there and I listen to Jared as he talks and talks, and the story starts to unfurl, and I'm like, that's really good. That's better than what I thought of. And then I just sort of make it so, as Captain Picard would tell us. So we could just sort of describe it to them and allow them to sort of, you know, go off on
Mhm.
a tangent with it. Um, and so if this is true though, once they get there, they are going to find out that the character that was sent to meet them is dead.
Right. And this is when you're talking about your act structure, this is what takes you from act 1 to act 2, because now you've had this incident, you've had all this, you've got a valuable treasure in a box, and you've got somebody dead that was supposed to get it from you.
Right, and it's you're starting to look mighty guilty.
Right. And that's when this switches from a job that went great to all of a sudden now things are going to happen to the players that they know are going to be happening. Number one, they've got a dead body on their hands. Number two, they're going to start hearing as the morning dawns. You're going to start seeing the eyes of wisdom everywhere, um, locking the city down, telling merchants that they can't sell their wares, telling people they can't leave their houses. And here you've got these three, four, five, however many players, um, in the street with really nowhere to go unless they tell you where they want to go.
So let me just make like a fine point here, and just this may be kind of like semantics, or it may just be a little bit too much here. I might be splitting hairs. Um, Once they get there, they discover that the person they're supposed to meet has been murdered, and they have many ways of dealing with it. They have the item in their possession. Um, does Act Two start when they maybe how does Act Two start? Do they step away from that scene and they look and they see that there are lots of Eyes of Wisdom representatives, or I should say law enforcement officers from Eyes of Wisdom that are hunting them down, or do they see something else, or what
I,
happens
th-
to?
I think because it's late night but soon to be dawn, they have a choice to make. They know that this body is there. They know that they've got the item, and they have it. You leave it up to them to decide. Well, what are you going to do? Are you going to go try to find an inn to sleep in? Are you going to sleep on the street? Are you going to you know uh, build some kind of hut? Are you going to go to the police and say, hey, we just stole this thing, I don't want it? Whatever that they choose to do, um, is up to them, but eventually it's going to lead to a conflict with the eyes of wisdom.
And so
And
in
yeah, go ahead.
and so in that respect, I suppose that there's going to be like there could possibly be a few hours worth of time in which they're
Correct.
running around the city and they're just sort of trying to figure out like what's going on. And like you said, they may go to the police directly. They may go into find a room at an inn. They may go to a pub, a tavern. They may go to any number of different places. So how are we going to like deal with this aspect? What is seen? So I've kind of bumped us into Act Two at this point, and because we fulfilled, and if everybody kind of takes a look at what I've written what we wrote in here last week. This is basically our threshold, our first threshold, where we move from we're going to move from the first act and into the second act. And in order to go from the first act to the second act, we have to kind of fulfill several different things. And the several different things that we're going to fulfill here are that the players have gotten the items, they've delivered it to the guild leader, but they've discovered that he's been murdered. And this, of course, is what we just talked about. It leaves them with a valuable item and nowhere to take it. So what is scene 2A? Like, once they step out of the bounds, is it going to be like another tour through the city where they find out all these things have happened, or?
Yeah, I would imagine that they you know they're likely going to feel like either they have to hide or they have to get out. And then as they either find a place to hide or try to make their way out of the city, they'll find out that the city is now in lockdown. Now they can find that out by going to the inn, and then the innkeeper says, well, you can have a room, but you're not going to be able to leave because we've been given this order.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're going to try to get to a gate and then find that there's the eyes of wisdom blocking it, and just kind of rounding people up and asking them what are they doing here. And then this is where again, what's going to happen, which
Mm-hmm.
is eventually they're going to meet with Mattis. But you don't know whether they're going to meet with Mattis because they're kind of bumbling through the streets and he finds them, or whether they're in an inn, they're in a room in the inn trying to figure out what to do with this box, and there's a knock on their door, or they fess up and just go to the police station, and that's where he is. So Mattis is going to meet them, but where he meets them depends on what they decided to do.
So then we can call scene 2A the scene in which they leave and they're touring through the city and they're finding out that all of these things are true. And it sounds like there's going to be, what, like you said, a confrontation with Mattis at a certain point. So he's either going to arrest them or they're going to go to him directly. Is this
Correct.
correct?
And yes, and then interspersed throughout scene 2A, I think, is another one of these information gathering sessions
Mm-hmm.
where, if they go to a shopkeeper and show him the idol, you know, you kind of give them clues as to, oh, where did you get this? This thing means this, or give them clues to the what this magical box may mean, and kind of give clues to this was meant to go to Tito's temple. What's it doing here? But just dropping the clues of how important this thing might be. Um, and this is where you intersperse with just the kind of characters that you see in your crime shows.
Mm-hmm.
These are just the normal people that, when you ask the right question, they just divulge a little bit of information to let the puzzle start to
Right.
piece together.
Right. Okay. This is starting to make a lot of sense. And I like the fact that, I think that what I would probably do at a certain point is I would probably make up two or three different NPCs just to sort of throw in there at a certain point. And then I'd end up reskinning them and give them some sort of background or something. Um, so that wherever they get plugged in, like if the players again decide to go out to, I don't know, an aqueduct that's been built or something, there's someone that keeps it, or the harbor, and they want to talk to the harbor master or something like that, we can sort of quickly drop a name in there. But I think certainly this gives us a really good foundation. And I think again, it's going to be a moment where it's kind of up to the player characters. You say, okay, what do you want to go check out? They're going to say they want to check this out, they want to check that out. And one thing that I often do, and I'm not sure, um, I'm not sure how comfortable a lot of game masters are doing this, but like let's say that we're in this situation where the players now have to decide where they're going to go in the city. I will allow them to tell me where they want to go, and then I'll ask the player, I'll throw it back in their face, and I'll say, look, you've just gone to the harbor. Who are some of the contacts that you may have at the harbor? Or who are some of the characters that you may see, shady characters that you might see, like sitting around on the docks? And then I have the players make up those characters for me, and sometimes they have great ideas. Sometimes they have ideas, and sometimes they don't have any ideas, and I'm kind of forced to think of something on the fly. But I really believe in kind of throwing it back to the players and asking them to do a lot of the heavy imaginative lifting when it comes to the story and making up these NPCs. I think that can really help out tremendously.
No, I agree with that, and I think what it comes down to when you're GMing a game is you always give the player the most agency to do what they want to do, and then if you know you lead them down a good road with with the lead they've given you, but then if they're not advancing the plot, that's when you can, to use the cipher term, that's when you bring the intrusion.
Yeah,
Like you try to let them get there, but then if in this game, right, this story, if they're dawdling and they're
hmm,
hiding out, well, then now you introduce, well, the guild assassins are, find out that their leader is dead,
right.
and so they're coming after the players. So if they're thinking that they've escaped or done something else, that's when you can create more complications, because they're not, if in that way you're not letting them dead end things,
Yeah, yeah.
but
Or
never lead with that, like and I think that's the difference, is that you're not just making it that you're giving them the opportunity to go find a fence who turns out to be a priest of the Owl Clan and says, "Do you know what you have? This item is important." But if they don't do that, well, then you can let an NPC do that introduction.
yeah, so you try to let the car turn over on its own, but if it stalls or doesn't start, then you give it a little jump start, and you bring that sort of that plot device or into the story to propel it forward. Um, so let's
It's
take
where
a
it brings us back. Oh, sorry. I was
mm,
going to say that's when it brings us back to what we were saying before. It doesn't matter which NPC brings it,
right,
as long as it's brought.
right, right.
You know.
Um,
So
So that brings us then to, speaking of being brought, that brings us to our scene 2B, where we're talking about the actual meeting with the captain. Now, we kind of established that the meeting could be under two possible circumstances. Either the captain has tracked him down, found him, and is just about to kind of like, capture them, or they actually go to the captain himself. So in either scenario, essentially what's going to happen is the players are going to have a moment to talk to the captain and learn a little bit about him. So can we flesh out who and maybe because I've actually forgotten a little bit myself, but can we talk a little bit about who Mattis is and what you think he's going to add here to the scene and how he's going to change and move the story forward?
well, I think it's kind of he's kind of the centerpiece of moving the story forward, because he is going to be, you know the captain of these Eyes of Wisdom, who are, the enforcers, so to speak, of the cult. But then he's going to be thrown into this situation where, um, he's got to be brutal, and he doesn't like to be brutal. But the order comes down from Tito that the city's got to be in lockdown, and everybody and anybody who could possibly be suspect is going to be treated harshly. And he doesn't agree with that, either for religious reasons or just, humanitarian reasons. He doesn't believe that, the theft of something from a caravan, which nobody knows even what it's about, should lead to this brutal lockdown of, normally a very peaceful city. Like, this is not a totalitarian state, but the order is coming down because Tito is now terrified that his ritual is at risk, that he's asking this police force to be something that they haven't really been. And so he's almost leery of, hey, what is going on here? So at this point, the way that he is going to treat the PCs, because obviously eventually he'll meet them
Mm,
and eventually he'll find out that they have this object,
mm.
it's going to make him start to wonder, well, who's really the bad guys here?
Right. So then what is either way, the players are going to be probably dragged off to this holding cell.
Huh?
And if not, they may be just thrown in a paddy wagon, in which case we reskin the holding cell as the paddy wagon or whatever. How can we describe and how can we um, sort of make real to the players what this paddy wagon or what this holding cell is? Are there some details? Are there some minions to perhaps the captain, Captain Mattis, that can bring this kind of alive for the players?
Yeah, I think they should get the sense that this police force is is not all that um, competent. Like they're almost like, I don't want to say Keystone Cops in that sense, but they're not. They're not the hard boiled city guard that, again, turning tropes on their heads. They're not the brutal um, city guard that you see in most fantasy settings where
Mm-hmm.
they're tough as nails and you can't mess with them or they'll kill you types.
Mm-hmm.
Where maybe they're just like, hey, we're not really trained to do this because everything's been so peaceful and everything's been so tried and true. And now not all their personalities have to match that.
Yeah.
Like there could be some that are a little more bloodthirsty than others, and that's where some conflicts could arise with Mattis. But I see Mattis as kind of a nice guy. I see him almost maybe a Commissioner Gordon type, where
Mm.
he's the good cop in a city of bad ones, or certainly the a cult of bad ones in his eyes.
So he's
You
doing the
know,
best he can with what he has.
right? And I think that he can be sympathetic to these guys, where he could take a quick stock of them and say, these guys didn't know what they were stealing. These guys didn't know. They don't know their A from their elbow
Mm-hmm.
in this city.
Mm-hmm.
So what deeper is going on here? Like, and that's where they can explore, depending on if they divulge that it was the guild leader, that could set off some triggers for Mattis, and then he can inform them of what could be happening. And eventually, like I said, eventually they'll probably turn over this box,
Mm.
or at least show him this box.
What's his feelings? What are his feelings about it then? When he sees that this box is there, is he basically going to be like, "Look, you got to get it out of the city," or "Let me take that off your hands," or "That's too dangerous for me"? What is his attitude? Is he even going to know what this statue in the box means?
Well, I think that he will have been told by Tito, either directly or indirectly, that you got to find this thing, and anybody who's got it needs to be executed.
Mm.
And this is anathema to Mattis because he's not an executioner. And so he's going to start to wonder and do things, and this may fly in the face of his men that may feel like he's been a traitor to it, or something. But I think depending on how the PCs treat the cops, I think that he would rather not deliver it. If
Yeah.
if this is something that Tito is willing to kill everyone for,
Mm-hmm.
his thought is maybe he shouldn't have it.
So
So he
then,
may.
so then, is he going to sort of look the other way and allow them to escape, or what do we think is going to happen here? Because at the
That's what I was feeling, is that he would allow them to escape, or at least give them a clue of where to go with it. Maybe there's another NPC that he can direct them to that would be able to identify this thing and give a clue as to what its importance might be.
Mhm.
Maybe another, rather than Tito, who maybe he's a more recent archpriest. Maybe there's an older one that Mattis liked a lot better, but is now fallen out of favor. Or because this is where
Oh,
you need to give the PCs the ability to uncover the plot that Tito has,
right. And
and Mattis is their best friend
so
to do
then
that.
is Mattis going to say, I'm kind of uncomfortable with all of this, but there is this other priest who has fallen out of favor, maybe because of the fact that this other priest sees along the lines that Mattis sees, and sort of recommend go see him about it.
Exactly.
So then let's do this. With scene 2C, I'm assuming that this is going to be the escape. Is that kind of it?
Hmm. Right.
So then, if it's the escape, we don't want to. So as we move through the plot, we want to sort of crank up the difficulty level and make it more difficult. And we've already kind of thrown them a bone just in the simple form of giving them the robbery to do for free. How is it that we're going to make the escape difficult without just allowing them to escape? Is there something we can do to make it tough for them? Like Mattis maybe says, okay, I'm going to look the other way, but then maybe the escape is up to them somehow?
That's what I would think. Maybe Mattis can communicate to them that, hey, look, I can't let you guys go. My men can't let you go, and they can't know that I want you guys to escape. And so he could either give them some way out, but ultimately they would have to figure their how they would escape. It
Okay.
could either be a timing thing, or just some way of doing it, or because the other thing is just by logic, Mattis is going to take the box, right? Because he can't just let them keep it while they're in the holding cell.
Right.
But maybe he tells them, hey, you've got to get out of here, and the box is going to be here.
Right. He like perhaps so then I think we kind of have to design either a building or a wagon or a series of like wagons or whatever, which we can kind of reskin between the two of them
Right.
that create a set of challenges for the players that they have to sort of overcome in order to, first of all, escape. Second of all, sneak to where the box or the statue is. And then third, take it. And so what we can do is if we create like a small little challenge for each one, we can turn these into rooms if they happen to be taken to, some sort of a holding prison structure, or we
Hmm.
can turn them into wagons should they be caught in the city and not taken there. And the interesting thing about this, though, is that I had forgotten about this, but there is a bit of a ticking clock. We had written that the Inquisitors are arriving. So I would assume that the moment that Mattis gets hold of this thing, he has to sort of, maybe he delays for a few minutes, but then he has to send a messenger to tell the to tell the priest or tell Tito that we've got this thing, come get it.
Right.
Um, so could it be that he says, look, I just sent a messenger. I could wait for 5 minutes, or I can give you 5 minutes before I send the messenger, or whatever. But then we create this situation where they have to break out, they have to get the item, and they have to get away and get into hiding before the Inquisitor's forces arrive. In particular, though, because it's expected that Mattis is going to execute all of them. So when they show up, excuse me, when they show up, he's going to have to explain why they're still alive or something like that. So it could be like even worse. So what do we think we can do here? Can we create 2 or 3 little hurdles for each thing that the players have to do in order to escape?
Yeah, I think, and this is where, I don't know if we have to get into, 100% detail, but this is where you can draw on different resources, either, escape room type resources or trap design type resources. And depending on which system you're running here, this is where, the mechanics of the game can kind of bring you through to this. Like if it's a Savage World setting, for example, this is where, and I don't remember the precise terms of how they do it, but this is I think it's a something task where,
Mm-hmm.
it's a combined task that the
Mm-hmm.
players have to go through, and there's a certain set of roles and how they do it. It could be that this holding cell is like a big bird cage, and they have to get, climb down out of it, or use,
I got it. It's a bird cage hanging over, suspended. It's enormous. It's like a room. Like there was this thing in Minority Report, and actually no, wait, forget I said that. Think Time Bandits. You remember in Time Bandits when they're hanging in a cage and they're suspended in this just blackness, and they
See, I
have.
have no recall of
Oh my
Time
gosh.
Bandits at all.
So
Yeah.
there is this scene in Time Bandits where they are all captured and they place the Time Bandits into a cage that's hanging in blackness. You cannot see anything no matter what direction you look. Up, down, left, right, there's nothing. But what they discover is like 100 feet off to the other side, there's another cage hanging. And they have to swing the cage back and forth and jump to the next cage and get into that cage. And they have to sort of follow through these cages and go from one cage to the next in order to get out.
There you go. Yeah. I love it.
Okay, so the holding cell is a bird cage hanging in, maybe it can be this sort of surreal place of darkness, right? Just something that's powered by all of these towers or something, but it's hanging in a of pit of darkness. PCs must swing from one cage to another in order to free themselves. So maybe they have to swing from one to the next to the next. And I would say we need to put some cool oops, NPCs into these cages. They swing to the exit of this holding area. And maybe it could just be something where and it could be something like this. Rather than make it something elaborate like that, we could just simply have like this. Maybe there's an area of the towers that are just extremely high, and suspended between them, like in a grid, are all of these cages. And they're like 200 feet off the ground. So what they have to do is swing around from cage to cage to cage to cage, moving from one to the other, and then get into one of the towers and and then knock out one of the guards and then get out, climb down. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think that works. And then, at this point, they escape. They have a direction to go. They have a contact they need to meet, and they have the item they need to bring to. And I think that that's a good segue into Act Three, right?
I think so.
Because now they know a plot is afoot. They know that they're key to it, and they still have the agency. They can still say, well, I want to escape, but more likely they're going to try to find this other priest. And in the meantime, the inquisitors are going to be chasing them, And maybe those guild folks who think that they murdered the guild master could also be chasing them.
Yes.
And it could lead into kind of I don't know if you remember the movie True Romance,
Yes.
where you have Christian Slater and Patricia Arquette that have something that everybody wants, the mob, the cops, and whoever else, and then they all kind of meet together and start shooting each other
That
and
is
and
that
and, and
is
trying to get away.
two Quentin Tarantino references in the
That
same
that is correct.
in the
That is
same.
correct.
That
Yeah.
was the script that he sold, I
Right.
think, to pay for Reservoir Dogs. And then when he made
Oh, that I
Reservoir,
didn't know. Yeah.
yeah, I think that was the first one that he sold, but it was like the second or third of his films that,
Mhm.
if you want to call it his film, because it's really a Tony Scott film. But
Right.
anyway, I digress. So let me ask you this. Here's what I see to sort of just smooth and connect things here. I had said earlier that maybe someone's coming to collect the item. So we could go two ways. Either they've got to get into that wagon where it's being kept in order to steal it away, or maybe by the time they arrive, it's actually already being driven away. And they need to get into the wagon, beat up the bad guys, and then take that item. And maybe that's the point where they gain their vehicle, maybe to hightail it out of there, or they grab some horses or something like that, and then they
Mhm.
steal it and they take it. So I think this is a good place to. That's our, like you were saying, that's our transition there. And now suddenly they have the item and they're going to be chased. So let me see if I can get this down so that we don't forget it. But they need to get to the item. Um, which is being held in a nearby wagon under guard. And so if they make it in time, if they get out in time, they can uh, attack the guards and the wagon. If not, then they need to chase the wagon and get it on the go. And then
Perfect.
we hope that at that point, then they just simply have to get away, which may not be simple. Because at this point, like you're saying at the end of True Romance, everybody is trying to chase them, and this is where we can throw complications in, like you were just saying. So at this point, the guild is looking for them because they're the ones that they think have murdered the guildsmen. The inquisitors are looking for them. The cult is looking for them because they want to get the item. And then perhaps the city just thinks that they're a bunch of bad guys and they're on alert looking for them. So just maybe normal civilians are looking for them as well. Um, how's the chase going to go? So I'm looking now at Act 3. We don't have to. I don't think we have to be too detailed in how we, because we're kind of running out of time, and I think we've done a fair amount of work tonight, and we definitely have enough to probably say we have a game. Because one of the things that I've noticed, and Steve, you can kind of chime in
Mhm.
here if you agree. One of the things I notice is that I tend to do a lot of planning in the beginning and maybe the middle, and then I don't plan out too much of the end. I have some very big things that I want to happen, but what usually happens is if I plan out so much at the end, I neglect the cool stuff that the players bring to the story. And what it's better for me to do, and what I feel like works much better, is to just listen to the players through the first act and the second act. And then a lot of the stuff that comes into the third act is just like throwing things into the mix that the players have come up with and all the kooky theories that they have about what's going on, and sort of throwing all that at them. So if we're going to have a chase and obviously combat with the Inquisitors, I think the bare bones of what we really need to do here is come up with like a couple things to happen during the chase, just real simple, and then what the Inquisitors are going to fight like. So any ideas? And we can kind of, again, we can just throw out some quick stuff. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but any ideas to make the chase kind of unique or different?
Well, I think that the players will dictate. Like either they could, you know, just use the horses to just run as fast as they can, or they can try to skulk. And I think depending on which of those two options that they take, it'll kind of dictate what happens, in the chase. And I think that that's where the players could kind of show you what they want to do. You know, do they want to chase and fight, out in the open, or they want to avoid as much uh, being seen as possible. So they might come up with disguises. They might come up with any number of things, or they might just take the direct route and just charge
I
into
like it.
it. So, but at any rate, eventually they're going to get to this older priest's house, or wherever he might be.
I like it. Very simple. And are they going to, what about, I actually like the fact that you reminded me of something because I sort of imagined it as being a chase, but you know what? You're totally right. They could just jump off the wagon and take the back alleys. And at that point, all of the stuff that you plan for the chase is like out the door. So what we could maybe do is just we're preparing ourselves both for a possible chase and some sort of events that may bring a lot of like kind of like roller coaster thrills, but we're also preparing ourselves for a quieter and maybe more mysterious sort of running of the gauntlet. Um, what is then? We had originally put combat with the Inquisitors to be followed by a confrontation at the Watchtower Temple, which is, I believe, where all of this was supposed to take place. But it sounds like we're kind of turning this more into getting it to this other priest who's fallen out of favor. Have we sort of decided that maybe this priest who's fallen out of favor is going to be kind of like the guy that once this item gets to them can kind of like take over, grab it, and then help us help them end the adventure? Is that what we're kind of looking
Yeah,
at?
I think that's kind of the way that it seems to be going. And if
Hmm.
they're able to successfully get it to him, he can kind of be the info dump of the plot, and then a couple of things could happen from there. Either you know Tito arrives with his own enforcers, and they could have a fight right there with him. And either they could have a fight with him, or the priest can give them, maybe he can give them a hoot signal of how to let the guard know that they need to leave the city, or just so then let them decide, do we want to fight Tito and be the grand heroes, and everybody loves us because we stopped this plot, or do we just take the idol out of the city and foil his plans and live to fight another day if we ever come back here? And I think that either way is fine. I think from a dramatic perspective, in order to make Tito to be the real big bad guy, I think the old priest is probably going to be gone. I think that Mattis is probably going to have a crisis of his own of what he wants to do. Either stand and fight, or maybe sacrifice himself for the players to get away. But either so really it's going to depend on, are the players heroes, or are they uh you know sneak in and get out types, both of which I think fit both genres, the noir genres. Because let's face it, noir is pretty dark, so the chances of them being heroes that just win the day and everybody loves them is probably pretty slim. So either they have to run, or they have to kill Tito and end up being fugitives anyway.
You know what? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was done.
Well, I was going to say this. there's two ways of looking at it. If it's a one shot, then I would give them Tito,
Hmm.
or at least give them a fair opportunity. Um, it can be satisfying either way. Like if it is a one shot, then I have no problems killing the players off. I feel like Tito obviously is going to be a character that needs to be just powerful enough that one-on-one with any of the players, um, they would get trounced. But the more players, the more PCs we throw at Tito, perhaps the more trouble he's going to have. So he's maybe not as all powerful as we think, but compared to say the average citizen in the town or in the city, he is quite powerful. So if I were going to do it as one shot, I would make it a final confrontation in which one side or the other is going to perish.
Hmm.
Um, However, if I thought for a second that maybe my players are liking this game and I think we're going to run with this and maybe play a few more sessions, I would probably allow them, or I would boost Tito's minions up in power, create some sort of final confrontation where they risk living or dying, and maybe some of them might get killed, or but they would defeat these Tito's allies, Tito's minions, and then Tito just simply goes away, and he lives to fight another day, which creates a character, a villain, a baddie that can kind of run through the next two, three, four stories and create a bigger, kind of more epic conclusion where he keeps running away every time and he lets his minions take care of things until maybe the final confrontation in 5 games is going to Tito's um, I said headquarters, his what the heck is his lair,
Hmm.
right? So I think we have a really good, well-rounded 3 acts. What would you say, assuming the characters survive, what would you say our epilogue or our denouement is going to be in all of this? And so with an epilogue or denouement, what I like to do is I like to show ways that maybe the city's changed, things that have to change with the players. Maybe they have to look at life a little bit differently. Maybe now they're on the run. What do you think is going to happen just in like you know, a general feel?
I
Um,
think I think the most likely end is that they foil his plan either by destroying the object or by fighting them off. So obviously the ritual doesn't take place, so they win in that regard. But I don't see them walking out of this as being able to be lauded as heroes. I think they become fugitives. I think that's the most likely idea. But now they've made some contacts. They can probably, just tying up some loose ends. They can figure out that it was Tito that had the guild master killed. So they can be allies of the guild. They have Mattis, who may or may not make it out alive himself. But if he for some reason dies, the 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 eyes that are still loyal to him could be their allies. So they kind of come out of it with a kind of a strange position where they have some friends, but they've also got the most powerful enemy they could possibly have in Tito.
oh, I just discovered that I'm writing below the below the lip of the
Oh,
layout. And it's okay.
oh, that's all right. Yeah, that's fine.
So they have friends now, but also have the most powerful enemy in the form of Tito.
Yeah,
I like it because it gives us some options on where we're going to proceed. And kind of like as I was saying before, if you're playing at a convention or something like that, you may just give the players Tito, um,
right.
or at least offer him. Whether or not they get him, that's something different. But if you're going to extend the game, then Tito, Tito retreats. Tito gets away. Tito does something in which the players don't get him, and then we dangle that little carrot in front of them, perhaps over the next few games. And maybe now, because I'm thinking the next game would be them basically on the run and maybe being hunted for a game or two. Um, well, Steve, what do you think? You think we have? Think you have a good
I,
enough?
I think we've got a game. I mean, I think we've got a session, or if it's true to the way we play, a three-parter. But
It's true.
uh, but at any rate, I mean, I think that just the basic outline, really gives you something to go on, and I really, it's funny when you do this stuff, and just for background for the viewers, we didn't really talk about this.
Yeah.
Like we didn't really, like, a lot of the stuff that came out today, and certainly a lot of the stuff that came out in the last session, was really off the top of our heads.
Mm.
And I think the lesson there is that, you know you create. And is it perfect? It's just like a novel. Like, and I don't remember who said this. Some famous writer said, a novel is never finished. You just stop writing.
Yeah.
Because you can always change and make better and do whatever. But we're not doing that here. We're creating a sandbox, and we're creating an outline, and then our players are going to take us in directions that we would never dream of. Like, it'll be interesting to, if this game ever gets played, to see what it looks like when the players have their
Right.
say.
Yeah.
It's funny, and just permit a tiny story. Like, I played in a module, a D&D module once at a game store, and it was a one shot, and it went a certain way, and I played it and I enjoyed it, and then I started DMing for that shop, and I got to read the module
Hmm.
after the fact. It was like 3 or 4 months later, and then I read, like, all the story beats that they had in the written module. And I'm like, this is nothing like
Right.
what we ended up playing.
Right.
Like, all the stuff was there, but we made it totally different.
Yeah.
And as a GM, that's actually one of the things that I really like about GMing,
Yeah.
is that it makes games better. You and I ran a game for you and our other buddy James, which was like, what was it?
West.
Savage Worlds, East Texas
Oh,
University.
I was gonna say West
Yeah,
Texas University,
West
but yeah,
Texas, yeah.
East
But
Texas.
yeah, so, like the supernatural, like, show type thing. And there was a point in it where you, like, smashed the Men in Black's trunk, and I was, as a GM, I was like, I had no no idea that a player would go in that direction. So I had to think on the fly, like, this just changed everything. Because in my mind, I had thought the Men in Black, they're going to try to run as fast as possible from them. And here you go, using a crowbar to smash into their trunk, and we had to decide what was in there and what happened. But it made the game better because that was something that you did, and not something that I had planned for.
Mm.
And I thought the adventure wrapped up pretty well, even despite that curveball. But if I had written it down in a linear plot,
Yeah.
that would not have been there.
Yeah.
And so what I like about this structure that we just created here now is that, yeah, there could be diversions, and there could be things going on that
Mm.
we never would even suspect.
Yeah.
And there probably will be. And that actually makes it better, because then it's not a writer reading his own work to players. It's players making choices that create a world. And you know
Yes, I really I like that idea, and I think that's one of the things that I'm always trying to do, that I always try to do as a game master, is to give the players. I try to allow the players to do the heavy lifting by creating as much of the world and as much of the characters and surroundings as I can, and I try to run with these things that they come up with, because I think, it's a cliche to say this, but a lot of times those players obviously come up with some of the best stuff, and I think that anything like this, like what we created tonight, or like a module, is really just it's more like a rehearsal to me. It's like a dress rehearsal for what you think is going to happen so that you have enough information about the environment that you're creating that when you get in there, you can make it all up and just sort of do what you want. It's like when people memorize, like they memorize the lines of a play or they memorize the lines of, say, a speech, and then they get up there and they sort of forget it, and then they just sort of speak off the cuff, and they're sort of conveying the spirit of what they had intended.
Mhm.
And I think that, like in this case, just looking at what we have on the screen right now, it could be that maybe for some reason the combat with the Inquisitors comes first because the Inquisitors get there. And then somehow your characters jump into the wagons, and then there's a chase afterward in which those minions of the Inquisitors are forced to chase after the protagonists, trying to hunt them down. And then by the time they get there, maybe Tito is doing something completely different, or maybe Tito is already having a confrontation with the old priest. But there's so much room to play, and I really think, just to sort of throw this up on the screen one more time, I really think creating three sort of sandboxes of different scenes and being able to know those scenes very well so that when you create them, when you're faced with conveying these stories or this story with your players, you have enough knowledge of where these locations are, who's at these locations, and what's kind of going to happen at these locations so that you can throw them out the window and then just run with what the players really want to do. I think it's a very valuable kind of tool. Um, well, Steve, thank you, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I think we got a game. I hope I'm going to cross my fingers that maybe at some point we'll be able to run this game. Maybe hopefully you can run it. You can't run it from me because I kind of know the background, but maybe I can just sort of host it and let you guys go crazy with it. But maybe we can run it on the channel one of these evenings coming up,
Yeah, I think
and
that'd
we'll
be
see
great.
what happens. So for those of you watching at home, thank you very much. This concludes the two-parter. I will be back again at a certain point with maybe with Steve or maybe with another game master, and we'll take a look at the art, craft, and sometimes science of designing an RPG adventure. If you like what you've seen, please do think about liking, subscribing, and one thing that's really helpful is when you share. Sharing really gets the word out. I am not really doing this for the fame and fortune. There isn't much fame or fortune involved. I'm just doing it for fun. And I'm doing this for those game masters out there that wish to learn and talk and sort of improve their game, myself included, because explaining this process, going through it live on camera is actually very helpful for me as well. So please do think about that. Like, subscribe, maybe share. We will be back. I don't know when, but hopefully soon with another Game Master. And to all of you out there, thank you very much for watching. Um, have a great game and stay safe. Oh, and for those of you in New England, we got our, well, Steve, are you gonna get slammed down there? You're in
We
DC, right?
it was snowing here. I
Mm-hmm.
think it probably still is, but we're only expecting to get like an inch or less.
Oh,
Not like you guys.
they
New
are.
England's gonna get rocked.
Yeah,
Yeah.
holy cow. Like I was looking at the weather for Mass, Southeast Mass. I'm in Cambridge for those of you watching, but it looks like we might be getting 2 to 3 feet, which is fairly impressive. I lived in Alaska for quite a few years, but 2 to 3 feet is impressive, I would say, even maybe by Alaska standards. So we'll see what happens. Um, but anyway, have a great game and stay safe. We'll see you next time.